Welcome to the HerbWorks podcast featuring Roger Drummer, the formulator at herbworks.com. An educator in the field of nutrition and Chinese herbalism, Roger has a unique ability to keep things simple by taking all the guesswork out of complicated health issues. HerbWorks is committed to helping you improve your health and enhance your life through herbs and common sense.
Welcome to the HerbWorks podcast. I'm Laura Schachting.
And Roger Drummer.
So today we are talking about what, Mr. Drummer?
Letting go of fear.
Letting go of fear. That sounds very definitive.
Well, I read a few articles this week talking about how getting a negative diagnosis has pushed people into developing another medical condition. And it's all based on stress. You know, and stress, a lot of stress has to do with fear, you know, things that you're frightened of and that you want to change but can't. And so I think that, these a few lessons on how to deal with your stress and let go of fear would have helped all these people in these studies.
Okay. So you're going to be sharing some personal stories, I hope.
I am.
I'm
going to talk a little bit about PTSD, about cancer diagnosis, about just feeling helpless around stress, things like that, and kind of cover it all.
Okay, so what would you like to start with? Stress or cancer, or how the two are related?
Well, I want to mention these two studies just up front so we have a basis of what we're talking about. One of the studies showed that when you get a cancer diagnosis, that almost 25% of the people ended up with PTSD.
Oh, I can understand
and they
why.
still held on to that 4 years later. Now, another group of people, a large percentage of them, and this was a huge study out of Sweden where they studied almost 6 million people, and a large percentage of those ended up with a heart attack from getting their diagnosis. And what is the thing that connects both of these things, the PTSD and the heart attacks, is the stress, the inability to let go of that initial diagnosis. And so a lot of that just comes back to not having any techniques for stress and not being prepared for, negative things that happen in life, and really not having any tools for how your body can just make that transition from being locked into an extreme stress response, because both of these have to do with stress responses, and being able to have the tools to move forward and change it. It doesn't mean that you're completely stress-free. It just means that you've allowed your body to be able to handle what has happened and then move on to a different state of health.
Right. And, I think we talk a lot about, financial wellness, about physical fitness, but we don't always talk in our society about emotional fitness, about being able to handle stress and what to do when bad things happen, because even healthy, well people have bad things happen in their life.
This whole study reminded me of an interview I did about 4 years ago, where I sat down to do a radio interview with another doctor. The two of us were being interviewed, and I mentioned that when you get a cancer diagnosis, it's so stressful that at that moment your immune system just completely shuts off, and there's no reaction from it.
Well, the shock is so great.
The shock of it is so great. And when you have a stress response, one of the things your body does is shut off your immune function, because it thinks the only thing going on at the moment is fight or flight. And so everything else just goes off, right? You don't regulate your own blood sugar. You don't have any of these normal body functions going on. And so it's just really important to have the tools available to deal with that. And I think for most people, because we have so many stressors in modern living, and we all are susceptible to getting a big diagnosis. Look at cancer. Half the people in the United States are going to end up with cancer. That's the statistic.
Even people with no risk and healthy lifestyles.
Even if you're just having a stressful job, you got to have some tools, and you got to know things that are available. Like, I'm an herbalist, so I know, and I talk about adaptogenic herbs all the time. But a lot of people have this misconception about stress and herbs, to where they're going to take herbs they'll never have any stress, or they'll take herbs and they'll be so relaxed they won't be able to deal with anything.
Oh yeah, a lot of people think that, don't they? I can't take something relaxing because I won't be able to get anything done.
Yeah, it's not how it works. You figure out the dose that works for you, but you just take herbs so that your body works better when you have a stress response. In other words, the best thing about a stress response, everybody's going to have them, is that you have it and then you move on. Your body recovers. Mm-hmm. And it has this different flood of hormones that comes on after the initial response, which then is your body resetting its own health. And that's the part that most people miss. So if you take something like adaptogenic herbs, and there's a lot of really great ones. I use, rhodiola and ashwagandha, reishi mushrooms, another great one. Eleuthero ginseng. These types of herbs tune up your glandular system so you can have a proper response and recover from it. And that's different. It's not about being relaxed into a blob, although you can do that if you take a lot of them. But, most people don't want to do that. People have these preconceived ideas about almost everything. That's one of the things that stand in the way of most healing, is that you have a preconceived idea about how you're supposed to respond and what's going to happen to you. And so, you have to be able to let go all of that. And part of that letting go is just having a healthy stress response, being open to things that are going on, because you can't really be open to most things unless you're utilizing all of your brain. And if you're locked into a stress response, you're not utilizing all of your brain. Mm-hmm. One of these things, one of the studies that they talked about was the PTSD. That one was surprising to me. I knew about the heart attacks because most, a lot of heart attacks that people have. I knew about the fact that a lot of heart attacks are related to stress.
Okay.
I remember, one of the best things I ever read on that was a book by Deepak Chopra. I must have read that 10 years ago. And he was talking about doing his residency. And he was at a hospital somewhere in Boston. And he was working the floor. It might not even have been Deepak. He might have been reporting on another doctor who had written this report. But it's been so long since I read the book. But what was fascinating was that this doctor was doing his residency, and he was on the floor where all the heart attack victims were. And so he just decided that he'd ask them why they had a heart attack.
Mm-hmm. I think I remember you talking about this.
And he thought that he would get all these people would go, oh, my cholesterol was so bad.
I ate too much beef, I ate too much shakes, whatever they say.
It was the bacon, Not a single one of them said that. They all related a personal, emotional event that they weren't able to let go of and that they didn't deal with. Every single one of them.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it was probably true because they were in bed after a heart attack, surviving and contemplating their life. And basically, they were in a very honest, open, position and sharing. And so, and it's the same way, you go back to the PTSD, how it's related to that. It's just, the best article I ever read on PTSD was by a guy in the Army who has PTSD. And what was fascinating about it was that he didn't get into the kind of telling you medically what goes on and what goes on during it. Basically, he said the way to deal with PTSD is to deal with your stress. He goes, because people aren't dealing with their stress. And so what they have is, imagine a glass that's full, right? You add one more stressor to it and you trip off into your PTSD, right? You just can't take anymore. Mm-hmm. But if you were dealing with your stress every day and you had techniques and you did things, then you'd have a glass that was a quarter full or half full. And when a stressor came up, you still had the reserve there to deal with it, right? It was very fascinating to see that way that he had come up with on how to deal with it. It wasn't just a straight cut medical condition. It was looking at a human, the whole human being and all the stressors they go through in life. And if you're able to deal with those, then the PTSD becomes manageable.
This podcast is brought to you by Herbworks, specializing in stress and brain essentials. Check out Roger's other articles and videos at herbworks.com. While you're there, take a look at our natural herbal-based product line for energy, stress, immunity, and sleep. Now back to Roger.
People don't realize that it's almost, with modern living, it's almost like we have to look at how stress really is a part of everything, right? And it's a part of every response you have to every human being is your stress levels.
Right.
So it could be just like working out, could be like any exercise, taking a walk. You just have something in your program. Like most people take a multivitamin, we should take a multi-adaptogen, because, that's just a different type of multivitamin, so to speak. And that just keeps your nervous system tuned so you can deal with life.
Yeah, and I mean, I would add to that don't you think that stress is all relative until you get a major life-threatening illness or diagnosis? And then everything you ever thought was stressful before in your life looks like peanuts on the floor.
Oh, it's like nothing. It's just like, don't sweat the small stuff. Well, everything's small stuff after someone tells you might die. So, it all becomes just small stuff. But, the reality is you gotta be able to know what your tools are. And, one of the tools is, could be yoga, could be working out, exercise, taking a long walk, getting out in nature. But, we are human beings who digest things. We eat things. Our body responds to plants, and adaptogens just make sense for almost everyone to do.
Well, let's talk about how you managed your stress level when you were given a cancer diagnosis.
Well, that to me...
Tell us your story.
I look back at that, and I actually think it's funny. It wasn't funny to get the diagnosis, but there was a part of me that was just observing the whole thing. You're so stunned. In fact, when the doctor told me I had stage 3 cancer, he said, now, I'm not going to tell you anything else because you won't remember it because your brain is just going, woo, 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 and there's nothing going in. He goes, so just go home. We'll talk some other day. Make another, come back or call me because your brain just can't process, And he knew because my doctor had cancer before. So I got in the car, and I'm telling you, driving that car was like I had 6 or 8 drinks. I just couldn't barely function driving in the car. So I was driving about 15 miles an hour, and that was about it. And then when I got home for the next couple of weeks, it was just like I was stunned. I was just sitting in the chair. How could this happen to me? What am I going to do?
Right, which is what everyone thinks. How could this happen to me? Yeah.
I open up the computer, and I go to research, and everybody that I'm researching is basically dying, so I quit doing that. But really what happened, and I realized this about 2 weeks into it, is that I was stuck in an extreme stress response. But I knew it. I was sitting there because I kept thinking, I'm the guy that gives lectures about this, right? And I talk about this all the time and how your brain drops down into a certain point. And I'm thinking about that. And then here's the funny part. Then I realized that...
Oh, please, tell me the funny part.
The funny part was realizing I had my own formulas for stress out in the cupboard. and then when I realized that, I just actually started laughing and started, it changed. Something changed because I realized, God, why am I sitting here? I got bottles of stuff in my cupboard, right? But I was so stunned. But then I went out and took 4 Inner Peace, and I'll tell you, things changed for me. That's why I tell people that the adaptogenic herbs saved my life. They weren't the medicines, the medicinal herb program that I took to get rid of my other issues, but it was the herbs that allowed me to not be locked into stress, which allowed me to lower my blood sugar, get into ketosis, do all these different things. It allowed my body to go into a mode where it could actually heal itself. Because you can't heal when you're stressed out. You can't heal when you have an extreme stress response because your cells just don't accept things. When you're locked into fear, if you don't let go of that fear, when you're locked into it, the cells, the pathways into your cells shut down. Your immune system shuts down. Nothing is really working. None of your energy flows. And believe me, part of healing is reestablishing proper energy flow around your entire system. That's what Chinese medicine's all about. It's all about proper energy flow everywhere in your body. So if you go get an acupuncture treatment, what are they doing? They're just increasing the flow from an area that has none to an area, you're taking a high energy area, removing a block so that it goes down to the low energy area. So your whole body's hooking up. It's kind of like an electrician in a house. He's hooking you back up. And so herbs do the same thing. Herbs are removing blockages and it's just one of their functions, but they're helping your body hook back up to its own energy field. And that energy field is really where all healing occurs. The trauma of a diagnosis, and something you just mentioned, the trauma of a car accident or the trauma of getting hit, something like they talk about with football or they talk about with sports injuries or just bumping your head in construction, whatever it is, that's a trauma. And oftentimes your body doesn't let go of it. Now, I've seen amazing things happen with people with traumatic injuries, even head injuries, just from adaptogenic herbs. And why is that? Because adaptogens relax your nervous system. They also work on the glands in your brain, which are part of how your brain actually comes back into tune or coherence, they call it. So the whole brain starts communicating and it balances itself. And, it's amazing on how the body has its own innate ability to heal from most things if you can tap into that and tap into that natural function.
Now, what is the difference for someone that is experiencing a large amount of stress or a traumatic incident or, some kind of awful diagnosis like cancer? How would taking adaptogenic herbs, such as, your formulas, be different than taking something like a tranquilizer, something that just, puts you out or...
Well, the big difference, and not that you might not need one of those, I'm not going to say anything negative about Western medicine, but...
Sure, but just what's the difference and what
the difference is a tranquilizer just basically tranquilizes you. There's not any change in your physical body. In other words, it's not going to like an adaptogen. An adaptogen goes to the glandular system. In fact, an adaptogen, one of the reasons why it's called an adaptogen is because it works on the part of your glandular system that runs all the processes by which you adapt to everything in life, whether it's walking into a hot room and your body cools off naturally, or walking into a cold room and it heats itself up. How it adjusts to anything in the weather and different things is all part of your glandular system. Your hypothalamus deals with that, right? So, and that's part of the HPA axis, which controls the stress response. So adaptogens are things that make the glands in your body work better or at their optimum level of function. So, and part of that function is dealing with traumatic stress. And so they send the signals to your nervous system on how it's going to react to stressors and release different sets of hormones depending on the state of the stress, so your body can recover and experience whatever it needs to experience, but then recover. Right?
I like what you said about the adaptogens optimizing your body's response to allow for healing versus simply covering a symptom or something that's symptomatic. That's the difference in taking adaptogenic herbs, is that now you're giving the body a chance to de-stress itself as opposed to masking a continual symptom.
In certain conditions, when you're traumatized certain ways, the medicine works great because you do need something.
Right, you've got to have something to
zone them out, tranquilize them, get them over the initial unbelievable trauma, right? But then you move into a different phase. You need to be able to do something, have something in your toolbox to help your body heal, because you can go home and even though you won't have those tranquilizers anymore, or you might stay on them too long and get addicted to it, but if you don't have them anymore, your body's holding on to that stressor. You have to be able to move forward from it. This is probably, the thing about all these people that had heart attacks months and down the road and a year down the road from their diagnosis, their body's holding on to that initial stressor and it's not letting it go. And when it's in that holding on phase, all your arteries are constricted and they're tight and you can easily have another major stressor which causes you more tension, and then you can have these, it's almost like you can set off these little tremors in your
oh my goodness, well, anyone knows
system.
when you're nervous about being in the doctor's office because you're awaiting some kind of diagnosis, your blood pressure shoots through the roof, right?
Yeah, some people are just scared of seeing anybody in a white coat take their blood pressure. And so, it's your emotions play a huge role in that. And when you're in that fear state and you don't have very good cardiovascular system anyway, that say that you have plaque in your arteries, then you're someone who's really in a danger zone because your stress is causing all this constriction, which can then you have a major stressor, or you get angry and you can break off plaque, which then ends up blocking something, and you have a heart attack, all these different things. But it's all this, it's almost like a conglomerate of symptoms that you have going on: the plaque, the constriction, the poor circulation, the poor quality of blood. Your blood's not moving very well anyway for most people because they're not healthy. So all those things combine with the stress, and then you're pushed over the edge, and then you have the heart attack. So you have to deal with that initial stressor, and so you don't end up having yourself in a position to have a heart attack.
Yeah, let me talk to you about taking adaptogenic herbs regularly, because I know as a yoga instructor that when we practice certain meditations, or people that pray, when you practice certain prayers, you have that as a tool in your toolkit when you, say, have to undergo a scary test or have to be put in one of those MRI machines or something like that, right? That you have something at your disposal. If you've been practicing it, you don't have to all of a sudden make it up and look around for it.
Yeah, that's the same thing with herbs, right?
So that's kind of what you're saying about if you take adaptogenic herbs regularly, you've already got some tools in your toolkit. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
You're already armed and dangerous for stress. You're ready. You're already armed. And the funny thing about adaptogens, if you really look into it, because people get these concepts, right? I can only take adaptogens because I'm really stressed. Well, there's an adaptogen called ashwagandha in a special form that we use called KSM 66, right? That herb is one of the very few herbs that's ever been studied that actually will raise your levels of testosterone if you take enough of it, right?
Huh.
So how could that actually do that? Well, think about it. Your testosterone is produced by part of your glandular system, right? It's part of your hormone system. Anything that helps your glands become more balanced and healthier will normally just assist the production of almost any hormone. And most hormone levels go way off for two reasons. One, stress, and the other one is you're not eating the right types of foods that allow your body to make substances. And that's one of the things that herbs are so great for, is allowing your body to make the substances it needs to stay healthy and in a position to be just healthier all the time.
So what advice do you have for people that might be going through a particularly fearful time in their lives right now?
Well, I would talk to a practitioner of something, probably a naturopathic doctor or an herbalist. I'm an herbalist, practice Chinese herbology, or someone in alternative health if you want to get into trying alternative methods of dealing with your stress and your fear. Because just like with, in my practice, I always focused on Chinese herbs, and now I have an herb company that basically promotes tonic herbalism and adaptogenic herbs, because those are the best herbs for dealing with stress. But if you go to standard Western medicine, you're just going to be put on antidepressants and probably tranquilizers. So you have to make your decision, what do you want to do? But the reality is that this is where alternative health really shines, is that area where you're not really sick, you're not really well. How do you get better? Western medicine is amazing when you have emergency situations, when you have really dangerous situations to deal with. There's nothing better than that. But when you're looking at just saying, I'm not as good as I want to be, I don't feel as good as I want to be, I want to learn something, I want to help myself, learn things that I can do for myself.
Some self-empowerment.
Self-empowerment. I want to be able to take something that makes me feel more alive and vital and handle my stress. That's where all these different modalities come in, and that's where adaptogenic herbs shine. They're really just about teaching you, as opposed to taking something just for stress. They're going to teach you how you can respond differently, how you can feel differently in the face of all these fears and all these stressors that you have. And that lesson that you learn from that is something that you can hold on to for the rest of your life.
And I think that's really an important point, because when you have something very traumatic happen, whether it's a car accident or a diagnosis of a fatal illness, you do feel like your life has been taken out of your hands. You feel out of control, you feel scared, and you feel like there's nothing you can do. And
this is again why people should get involved with finding out about healing and herbs and things they can do on their own before they have a major crisis, because then it's just more things in your toolkit. Mm-hmm. And the whole world can open up to you about all these alternative choices that you can make when you're underneath or under a crisis.
Right. It's kind of like what we were talking about with prayer and meditation. If you practice prayer regularly or meditation regularly, it becomes a toolkit in your toolbox. It becomes
a toolkit, just like the herbs and the programs and the going to get acupuncture and seeing your massage therapist and getting chiropractic. It's all things in your toolkit.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great talk about how not to be frightened to death, apparently.
Letting go of fear with adaptogenic herbs. Fear.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been Laura Shakti.
And Roger Drummer. And if you want more information, you can go to herbworks.com.